a change to an amendment contemplated for licensing of short-term rentals. Within your current ordinance, you have regulations regarding residency and qualifications in your residential zones. Those do not extend in the same way to your commercial zones, C1 and C2. One of the identified scenarios that we saw coming up even during the process was exposure to existing apartment buildings, now often located in the commercial zones. Some of them, your existing multifamily is now in that area, and the exposure for those facilities to be converted essentially to exclusively short-term rentals without residency requirement. This provision here is created in order to limit that exposure and stop essentially existing multifamily dwellings to be converted to essentially check-in hotels with no, thereby kind of undermining some of your housing goals to provide affordable housing options, long-term housing options in this area. The ordinance is drafted is not has no amortization period and no look back. It is it's term prospective only. So those people that have licenses today will not be impacted by this ordinance. It is only based on future licenses. So the issue has been identified as really an exposure issue, and probably something that we're really more concerned about continuing to happen. It's not such an issue that we have seen or recommend as staff going back and having an amortization or kind of runway period where people have existing licenses would lose them. This is only applicable to future licenses. So no impact on validly issued licenses today. So the ordinance you have is listed. There's really one section, and this is on page 29, that is inserted in the current ordinance. So we attempted to be as surgical as possible with this. It is listed under section 2. That's really the change to the existing ordinance in its entirety, as shown there. So the other piece that is defined is, what does owner mean? We went in and talked about ownership. That is also on page 29, how the ordinance of 510, chapter 510 is changed by this amendment and by this ordinance. So we have that presented to you. Again, this came out of affordable housing strategy. Much of the input from the stakeholders, from the 6 task force meetings, really impacted and involved this creation, and this was adopted by council. This ordinance is actually just implementation of the strategy itself. So here for questions. We did manage to get an electronic packet up, so we're in better hands than we were before.
Any questions for that?
I recognize that it doesn't affect the current folks that have more than one, but do you have any idea of how many owners now have more than one property that's used for STR?
We looked, there's really 3 noteworthy applications here on Sherman Street, Oak Street, and Cascade Avenue. So I would say less than 20 total licenses impacted. So, and really isolated into individual buildings right now. Most of those are townhouse related. There are a couple that are, apartment buildings, but they are multiple licenses to one person across the number of properties. So it was something that we identify. We have a list of every license that we have now. So it's more of a point of exposure, not as necessarily as something that we've seen overrun at this point. However, you are bringing on your first multifamily developments within the last couple decades. And so that's something in terms of preservation. Those are opportunities that have been invested in for the purposes of long-term housing. Again, you're not looking to see this undermined by having it backdoored into a hotel.
And so really this only affects the C zone. This is not R zone because you can't do STRs in. So if this is only C zone property.
It does affect our zone, but our zone has a more it's really not impactful to anyone because within the residential, it has to be your primary residence.
Right,
So-
it's a hosted home share. I call that versus the short-term rental.
Right, so
Okay.
those, it's hard to have more than one primary residence. So, so that really actually addresses that, that issue already. So it shouldn't have any impact on the residential pieces. Although it applies to them, it shouldn't have any impact on
Other questions?
With respect to the hosted home share part of it, I'm assuming that it doesn't apply to people who rent multiple rooms in their house.
It shouldn't because they're not multiple dwellings. So the point would be, you have a single family dwelling, a hosted home share is renting out a portion of your single dwelling.
So a dwelling unit is not.
Right, so you wouldn't have 4 licenses for 4 bedrooms of your house. You would have 1 license for the address. It's your primary residence.
Mark or Megan?
I did have my hands up, but Tim asked the question, so thanks.
I don't have any questions.
Justin, sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Did you mention the
Yeah.
slight change in language that you and the city attorney works through?
Yeah, there is one piece within section 4 regarding owners or operating license. I was becoming really picky with some of the language. I wanted to ensure, and we recommend a change that it's not the owners or operating license. You don't have a class of ownership today that all of a sudden is forever immune to this. The intent is existing licenses are immune and the owners of those licenses. So as written, thinking about future arguments I may have, it's not all of a sudden because you have a license today, you're forever exempt from this ordinance and any future license. So there's a slight modification that Dan had penned to section 4 to really clarify that it's existing licenses as of today are those that are preserved. It's not because you lived in Hood River and you had an operating license before 2022 that all of a sudden you can do whatever you want for until the end of time. So that it's just a matter of it's some semantics, but they're important when it comes down to.
So
such
that's
as
where you
this.
took out the or
Yeah,
on
and
this.
and
Okay.
Dan actually had some advanced modifications that really, I think, galvanized it in greater detail.
So did you want to change it from what we have here on page
Yeah,
29 right now?
and Dan, I think you can jump in and
Shall have prospective effect only and shall not extinguish operating licenses existing on the date of its enactment.
Okay, can you read that
Can you
again?
repeat that?
Shall not extinguish what?
Shall have prospective effect only and shall not extinguish operating licenses existing on the date of its enactment.
Okay. Right. Great. Additional questions? All right, do we have anyone that wants to give public testimony this evening? Jen, anyone on Zoom? Okay. Just want to ask, do we have any conflict of interest? No? No? Okay. Mark or Megan?
No,
Okay.
None.
None, okay. I have 4 rentals. They're all in the R zone. They're all long-term. So I don't think it affects anything to do with this whatsoever, but I just want to state that for transparency. Deliberations. I think we got most of our questions answered. How are people feeling?
else, can I start?
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
And I think I can say this because I really wasn't involved, so it's not self-congratulatory, but what I saw through this process going back a year or so was the council having idea of getting a panel together, getting advice, having staff spend time to think of good ideas, having this be one of the ideas proposed. Here we are voting on it. So it just, I think, and I get the least amount of credit because I didn't have as many touches as others like Counselor Saunders, but I guess I just compliment council and staff for getting this here. I think the short-term rental issue is a complicated one. It was a little bit before my time, but a lot of hard decisions were made and people continue to debate the policy choices that were made, but they've been made. And this seems like it's very targeted at solving a problem that should be solved. So I congratulate those who were involved and am pleased to vote yes for this.
All right, thank you.
I think it looks great.
Tim? All right, Mark? Thumbs up by Mark. Megan?
Yeah, I'm excited to vote for this. I think it's a logical loophole to close.
All right. I'm also in agreement. I think it's, just a potential problem that we could see coming down the pipeline. We're trying to proactively take care of it to keep more long-term rentals available. So great work. Thanks, Megan, for being on the committee, bringing us the ideas.
A really big shout out to staff for actually getting this in front of us. That's the hard part.
All right.
Mayor, may I
Go
just
ahead.
mention that city recorder sent you a letter of support from a resident today on this issue. Make sure that you had all seen that.
Okay, great.
That
Thanks
was-
for
I think
mentioning
the
that so
author
that we
was
have that
Kate Huffman.
in the record.
Mhm.
Great. All right, I'll go ahead and now close the public hearing and well, we have deliberated. We have deliberated. And there was no one to give other testimony this evening. So I'm looking for a motion to place ordinance 2070 on tonight's agenda for its first reading.
So moved.
Do we need to call out the edit or no?
Yes, I
Um,
modified the motion to, but that would actually happen in the regular business part of the agenda, because that's where the motion to adopt would occur. And that would be a roll call vote also.
Got
So
it.
just
Thank
don't
you.
forget that when it comes time.
Okay, well then I will second Tim's motion.
All right, Tim's made the motion and Megan has seconded the motion to place ordinance 2070 on tonight's agenda for first time reading with the amendment that we talked about. And it'll be roll call when we do that. All those in favor of putting it on the tonight's agenda for reading?
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Abstentions? Nays? Chair votes aye.